Welcome back to the London Futurist podcast. The legal profession is rarely accused of being at the cutting edge of technological development. Lawyers may not still use quill pens, but they're not exactly famous for their IT skills. Nevertheless, it has a number of characteristics which make it eminently suited to the deployment of advanced AI systems. Lawyers are deluged by data, and commercial law cases can be highly lucrative. One man who knows more about this than most is our guest today, Benjamin Alarie, a professor at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law and a successful entrepreneur. In 2015, Ben co-founded BlueJ, a Toronto-based company which uses machine learning to analyze large amounts of data to predict a court's likely verdict in legal cases. It's used by the Department of Justice in Canada and Canada's Revenue Agency. Ben has just published The Legal Singularity, How Artificial Intelligence Can Make Law Radically Better. And here at the London Futurist podcast, we do like a singularity. Ben, thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks for joining us, Ben.
Ben, is it fair to say that the legal profession has become an early adopter of AI systems? And if so, why?
Yeah, so this is a challenging question because painting the entire profession with a single brush is likely to immediately get lawyers' hackles up. They will resist that characterization immediately right out of the gate. But I think you hit on something, Callum, in the introduction, which is that the legal profession really is a data-heavy profession. And so I think that does lend support to the idea that it really should be an early adopter, at least in principle, of this kind of artificial intelligence technology. I think if we abstract away from the economics of law firms, so let's set that aside for a moment and just say, in principle, is the sort of work that lawyers do the sort of work that is amenable to improvement, radical improvement with artificial intelligence? I think absolutely the answer is yes. So much of what lawyers do involves prediction. It involves prediction of what courts will do with respect to a particular matter. It involves prediction of whose narrative of a particular interaction amongst parties will prevail before the court. It involves a prediction of how the law will evolve. It involves prediction of how governments, parliaments, legislatures may amend the law in the future. And all of this goes into advising clients. So in principle, absolutely, lawyers should be an extremely early adopter as an industry of this kind of technology. And on top of that, lawyers are clever people. And so lawyers are well positioned to understand how these sorts of technologies can accelerate and improve the sorts of work that they're doing. Now, I said, let's set aside the economics of law firms, because I think that's actually a really important part of the puzzle here. If we think about just in-house lawyers, all of those observations apply very straightforwardly, and you would expect in-house lawyers to quite embrace these sorts of technologies to improve their work in terms of dealing with large amounts of data, to predict how courts are likely to deal with disputes, and we can get into what all that means and go a little bit deeper on it. And automation, there are lots of things that lawyers are spending time on in an in-house setting that could be automated. In a law firm context, it's more complicated. You're going to have some partners who are keen to adopt the latest technologies for all the same reasons that the in-house people are going to be adopting it, and we've seen a ton of that in our experience at BlueJ. And then you're going to have folks who are quite happy with the status quo ante and are going to want to preserve how the firms have been operating. And there's a deep intelligence to that as well. The world is messy. Technology makes new things possible, but often the world doesn't change for lots of reasons that technology may make possible in the short to medium term. And so there may be lots of rents that those law firms can extract in the short to medium term that are just not going to be present there in the longer term. And so there's a rationality there too, economically, possibly from the self-interest of certain folks in certain kinds of law firms with a certain kind of culture. And so overall, lawyers are extremely clever. Artificial intelligence can make law radically better, and it's going to have uneven effects across the industry depending on which particular context that we really want to focus our analysis on.
One of the ways that I think that AI has already been used and has been used for quite a while by law firms and in-house lawyers is the process known as disclosure and discovery, which, as I understand it, applies both in mergers and acquisitions where there's a deal room set up and the target company will provide vast amounts of data about itself, its market, and lawyers will go through that. Or in the old days, in the good old bad old days, junior lawyers used to spend days sequestered in these rooms going through acres and acres of fairly dry material and trying to find out the contracts that might cause the transaction a problem. And the same thing happens in litigation, where both sides have to supply all the data or the information that they might use in a trial, and lawyers from both sides will go through it and look for the smoking gun, look for the sort of the wizard pieces of evidence that they can flourish in a court. And as I say, I think these are called disclosure and discovery, different words for different cases and different territories. And I think a lot of that has already been automated, hasn't it? How far has that process gone?
Well, I think we've seen a massive change on that front. You're exactly right, Callum. I remember as a law student working at a law firm for a summer, and I had personal experience with each of those different contexts, and it involved pouring through bankers' boxes upon bakers' boxes of documents and looking for particular kinds of clauses. One in particular was a vast repository of commercial leases, which all had some kind of change in control provision in them. And my task as a summer student was to go through all of these commercial leases, identify the particular provision in these leases that addressed the issue of a change in control of the company, and summarize them in a vast document, which then would feed into whatever happened on the transaction. I wasn't privy to that. Instead, I spent several days simply going through heaps of these documents and finding the provisions. Nowadays, that can happen almost immediately. These documents will be fed into a system, all electronically. The system will identify all the change in control provisions and almost instantly produce a report summarizing all of those change in control provisions and outlining what it means for the transaction. And it can happen immediately. Another time, I remember a senior partner, and this is in a brief summer at a law firm, a senior partner arrived at my office. I think it was probably, early evening on a Thursday, and said, plunked a box on my desk and said, Ben, you've got to go through this and find any reference to, and then said something, I forget exactly the details, but I read through this entire banker's box of documents, and I found two references to the issues that were referenced in this entire banker's box. I think I found the only two references, but it's really hard to know for sure. And I was bleary-eyed. It was 2 a.m. when I finished this work. And nowadays, this is trivially easy to accomplish with the kinds of technology that's used by every law firm. And we've seen an explosion in this technology over the past 20 years. There's been, a whole bunch of investment into this area. Private equity firms have purchased some of the leading firms in this area and are doing roll-ups and consolidations. And some of these companies have now gone public, and it's quite a mature technology. So you're exactly right. This is...
And would it be true to say that none of that work is now done by humans? It's all done by machines, or is there still a legacy hangover of it?
I don't know. I'm sure there are people doing unusual things in different places, but I think virtually all of that sort of work is now being done with the assistance of technology.
And did that steal a significant amount of revenue away from law firms, or was it not important?
That's an excellent question. I think there are probably overall ambiguous effects. I think there's probably a greater volume of that work being done now than there used to be, because it's just made it economically more viable to pursue greater diligence in an M&A transaction. It's reduced the cost overall of conducting really significant discovery. And that's probably led to more of that work being done, probably a compression of the margins and at least the number of hours in any particular case. But I suspect overall it has not dented law firm profitability. And if anything, I think the latest results suggest that law firms are as profitable as they've ever been.
So by hypothesis, maybe it's massively reduced the number of hours law firms are selling in that area, but they are succeeding in selling the use of the technology. So they've already in that area cracked the conundrum, which people are sometimes saying is quite a hard thing to do, selling the machine time, the machine service, rather than selling the human time.
I think that's right.
I think the discovery and disclosure are things that most of our audience will understand. They'll say, yeah, they can see the role of information technology and AI and that. But you talked earlier about prediction, and people may be more skeptical there. They'll say what's going on inside the minds of judges is more inscrutable. And especially when you talk not just about predicting what courts will do and whose narrative will prevail, when you talk about how the law itself will evolve, that seems to be another step up in terms of unpredictability. So what can you offer in terms of evidence that AI can indeed anticipate these possibly inscrutable decisions?
We'll be right back after a quick break.
The People in Performance podcast offers insights into the strategic competencies, behaviors, and results needed to increase the performance of employees and leaders. The show looks at all areas of the world of work, including attraction and recruitment, onboarding, training, and succession planning. Tune in to get a better handle on the stages of workforce planning you need to master in order to guarantee long-term success in a rapidly changing world of work. New episodes drop each week. Check out the latest People in Performance episodes on your podcast platform of choice. Follow us on socials and read the latest articles at pppod.com.
Let's start by propping up those objections that people make. Let's steelman some of those objections, David, because I think there's something to that visceral reaction that many of us share about trying to predict how judges are going to make decisions. On the one hand, there's a massive amount of information that judges are consuming when they are hearing a case. So they're hearing from potentially numerous witnesses. They're looking at mountains of documentary evidence. They're assessing the demeanor of witnesses. They're analyzing how counsel and how parties to the dispute are behaving themselves, conducting themselves. They're relying on things like how people are dressed in the courtroom, their appearance, how polished they seem to be, how sophisticated they seem to be, how genuine they seem to be. And judges themselves are processing all of that information with their full nervous systems. So they're using their eyes, but they're also relying on their gut reaction. They're relying on their hearts. They're relying on their compassion. They really are. I think I like to say that judging is a full body exercise. It's really something that is quite a vital human thing that we entrust certain individuals to do, and we have a very controlled process for identifying who may serve as a judge, who's been invited to serve as a judge, and then clear procedures for governing how they perform those roles, how they occupy those offices, and how they go about their business. And so for me to say, oh, David, Callum, we can predict how judges are going to decide these cases on the basis of much less information, I can totally understand why someone would say, well, Ben, that's quite arrogant, or it sounds nonsensical, or it seems to be that you're overclaiming in saying that. And so, David, your question to me is, what evidence, Ben, do you have to support this claim that you can do this? And so what I will say is, well, we have different mountains of information that we are basing these claims on. We have the benefit of being able to look at hundreds or thousands of past decisions in respect of particular legal issues, or more specifically, often for us, tax issues. And so, for example, if you take 1,000 past cases on a particular tax question, so for example, is a worker going to be characterized by a judge as an employee or as an independent contractor, taking into account all the circumstances of a particular working relationship between a worker and a hirer, what we can say is, well, you can look at all of the facts and circumstances of each of those particular working relationships, identify what it is that the judge decided after sifting through and processing all of that evidence, all of that information, and we have, say, 1,000 observations. What we can do is then pose this to a user and say, okay, what are the facts of your situation that you'd like to analyze? And we can make a prediction based on between 20 and 30 different factual attributes of that working relationship between a hirer and a worker. And what we know is that we are able to predict with well over 90% accuracy how future courts will decide those cases based on those facts and circumstances. And we know that in two ways, because I think the natural follow-up question would be, well, how do you actually know that? And how do you make that claim that you're 90-something% accurate, Ben, in predicting those cases? Well, two ways. One way is, as new cases are in fact decided, what we will do is take the facts and circumstances as found by the judge and enter that vector of attributes into our system, into our machine learning model, and say, machine learning model, please produce a prediction about how this case would be decided. And it'll produce a prediction. And we know that those predictions match up with what the courts have done with over 90% consistency. And so the predictions coming out of the machine learning algorithm are perfectly consistent in over 90% of the cases with what the courts actually do. So that's very good evidence, because what it means is we're predicting precisely what it is we're purporting to predict with our models, which is not to say that the law can't change, which is not to say that judges can't make mistakes, which is not to say that the algorithm can't make mistakes. And that means we're not going to get to 100%. But it is pretty stable in those kinds of circumstances at predicting what's going to happen. The second way, very quickly, is that we do backtesting. So as we are producing this model, we want to resist overfitting the data. And so we break out the data, and we'll train the algorithm on some subset of the data and try to use that model to predict the other subset of the data. And on that basis, too, we know that we're well over 90% accurate.
And the hurdle for success here for the system is to make the predictions better than a human lawyer would predict. And in many areas, it's a job for the most senior lawyer to take a view about whether the case could be won or lost. And if your system can do a better job than the QC, then it's done a fantastic service, and that's worth a lot of money.
I would agree. And I would say that the best way to think about these sorts of technologies is as a tool to assist people in forming those assessments, because the very best QCs in the land are going to make fantastic predictions. They're going to be very good predictions. They're going to rival anything you can produce using a machine learning system. The challenge is they have one brain and they have one mouth, and they have limited bandwidth, and they can't be everywhere assisting everyone. Can we replicate through technology the depth and sophistication of insight that they bring to bear on these kinds of cases? And I think the answer is yes. And so if you can anchor on the kind of prediction coming out of a system of the kind that BlueJay has produced, and then adjust on other things that are not being analyzed or addressed by the machine learning model, you stand to improve the overall accuracy as well. And so I think a QC plus a BlueJay system is going to outperform virtually any other individual or any other method of coming up with a prediction in these cases. And that is the power.
Yeah, because they're doing it in different ways, really, aren't they? The QC and the system. The QC is bringing his or her own experience to bear, and to a fair degree, what they're doing is answering the question, what would I decide in this case? Because they don't know who the judge is going to be, so they can't take the vagaries of that particular judge into account. So they're just going to think, what would I decide if I was the judge? Whereas the machine is looking at every single case in the past where this sort of case has been decided. The QC will do that as well, but the QC can't remember every single case, won't have read every single case, and certainly won't be able to spot the patterns of the details in every single case. So the QC is bringing a kind of judgment to bear, which the machine doesn't have, but the machine is bringing an access to data in their working memory to bear, which no human can have. So they're doing different things. So as so often is the case at the moment, human plus machine beats human.
100%. And the QC, to build on your point, the QC will be reading the newspapers, will be understanding the public sentiment, kind of, we'll have an understanding of general current events that it'd be very difficult to model for a machine learning algorithm purpose-trained, purpose-built for predicting outcomes in a particular legal setting. And so the QC just has different sorts of information to bring to bear. So I completely agree with you.
Will the outcome be that fewer cases go to trial? Or maybe that the cases that do go to trial are the ones that deserve more time from human judges?
That's certainly a prediction, David, that I would make, that the nature of the cases that go to trial will be the ones that are more in that gray area that could really break either way depending on the circumstances. That prediction is based on the intuition that it becomes economically more difficult to justify bringing a case or defending a case when it's less and less likely that you're going to prevail on the facts, especially in jurisdictions where there is fee shifting in favor of the victorious party in litigation, because that changes the economics even further. In some jurisdictions, like in the United States, fee shifting is not a common phenomenon, and so it won't have as quieting an effect on bringing losing cases or trying to defend cases that look like they may be losers. But in Canada and in the UK, fee shifting is quite common in various circumstances, and so you may actually see folks being quite nervous about bringing cases that look like they have less than an even chance of being successful, because you don't want to pay part of the legal expenses of the other party. And so the intuition here is, yes, we're gonna see those cases that are longer shots disproportionately be settled. The ones that seem more ambiguous will be the ones that tend to go to court. There's a different intuition there, though. Let's suppose that first order idea analysis probably does hold. What if you are at an NGO or at a law school legal clinic and you have a particular point of view about the way in which the law should develop? I can imagine this leading to more strategic litigation, where I'm going to try to identify just those set of facts that mean that this is maybe a 45% chance of succeeding, not a 20% chance, not a 10% chance, but a 45%. It looks like actually quite safe. We can maybe bite this one off, and if we can make strong normative arguments about why the law should evolve in this direction, why this particular case should go this way, I might strategically be identifying those 40 to 50% likely to prevail cases in order to start kind of working the precedent in the normative direction that I'd like to move it. And to the extent that that is true, then you would expect there to be a greater number of cases potentially being brought, because it increases the confidence of those who are engaged in strategic litigation to develop the law, to nudge the law in the direction that they'd like to see it. So I totally agree with the prediction that the cases that are going to be brought will tend to be less black and white and more gray. They're going to be more difficult to decide. I also am not as quite sure that there will be fewer cases brought. It could be that the overall volume of litigation is the same, or goes up, or goes down. I'm not quite sure about which way that all cuts, especially if we take seriously this idea that overall the costs of lawyering are going to be dropping through being aided by technology. The cost of bringing a suit writ large might be dropping significantly, which would then also be militating in the direction of more litigation.
So what might happen is you may get many more cases opened, but fewer cases actually going to court, because the systems are very good at determining who's going to win or lose. So you don't go to court if you are confident you're going to lose, but you open more cases because you've got cheaper access to lawyers. That makes sense. Before we hit the record button, you were saying that there's been some big news in the last few days, which you wanted to talk about.
Well, I think one thing that's dominating headlines, at least in North America, I'm not sure for you, is the strike in Hollywood, and 160,000 entertainment industry workers, writers, actors are now on strike and actively striking in Hollywood. And it's very interesting. I thought it might be worth talking about.
Sure.
I don't have
Yeah.
incredibly strong views on this particular topic, although I was interested in the question of, we're seeing this in the entertainment industry. It seems that the entertainment industry is potentially even less susceptible to disruption from these kinds of technologies than law would be. And where is the lawyer strike? where are the pockets of widespread industry concern in the legal profession? I don't think we see it. And so I'm curious. I was wondering if you, Callum, or David, you had views on this, and what makes Hollywood different from the legal profession?
Well, that is a great question. I can imagine that some great prosecutors might, in the future, complain that a firm has studied that prosecutor and has created something that mimics that prosecutor. Not all his or her personal mannerisms, but his or her style of thinking. And that prosecutor may then have fewer cases, fewer business, because the automated version of them is a lot cheaper and more scalable. That's what some of the actors and actresses are complaining about, that their likenesses will be used without their permission, or that something similar to them, maybe something that's even more beautiful than the most beautiful actresses, even more rugged than the most rugged actors, will appear on the screen. So that's what they're concerned about in part. So I can see that there may come a time. Is that the singularity you have in mind, by the way? Because so far we've mainly been talking about a relatively gradual, important, incremental change in how law is practiced. And at some stage I'm wondering, what is the singularity that you're anticipating?
That's a nice segue into the legal singularity idea. And maybe it's simply that we're not there yet, right? And so AI is not yet knocking on the doorstep of every single legal professional in a way that has led to the complete specification, to the extent that we can have it, the complete specification of law, and the elimination effectively of all practical legal uncertainty. And so I think that's what the legal singularity is about, is getting to a state or approaching a state. I don't know if it's fully achievable, this perfect predictability, but practical predictability of legal outcomes would mean that everyone would simply take for granted that there's legal certainty, that you're operating with complete legal information, you're operating with a complete understanding of your rights and obligations and the freedoms that you're able to exercise in your daily life as an individual, within the family context, in a corporate context, in a professional context, in your contracts with others, your agreements with others, and all of your interactions on a daily basis would be amenable to immediate legal analysis and perfectly competent and nearly perfect in terms of identifying the boundaries of what's legally permissible and legally impermissible. And if that's true, then it does beg the question, what is it that today's legal professionals, what role would they play in that future state as we approach complete legal predictability, complete legal certainty for practical purposes? I think there's a critique of this idea about computational irreducibility, and certain things you can't completely solve the system. This would be, I suspect, if I were to have a conversation about this with someone like Stephen Wolfram, he would say, there's computational irreducibility. The law is not going to be capable of being reduced to a determinate system. There's still going to be work to be done in the system to figure out what the right answer is. I think I would agree with that. But in terms of our practical lived lives, there's so much room for improving the predictability of the system. And most legal professionals will not be doing what they are doing today in that kind of system. And it's very difficult to make predictions precisely about what's going to happen. I have no doubt that there will be roles to play in maintaining and servicing that system, but I think the roles are going to be very different than the roles played by legal professionals today.
So in the legal singularity as you see it, most law will be like a solved problem. You'll know in advance what the outcome would be if it was to go to court. It'll be because an AI system will be able to tell you. You might not be able to determine it yourself, but an AI system will. You could ask ChatGPT 10, if I was to do this thing, would I get sued for it, and would the suit against me work? And ChatGPT 10 will give you the right answer, so you know whether you should do it or not. And so therefore, there won't be very many people, if any, working in the legal industry. Is that what happens in the legal singularity as you see it?
That's substantially the vision, Callum. And I think it goes. I think it's accomplished in largely the way you just put it, with another component, which is law will be generated in real time and on demand. So it's not that there's some body of law that exists that's determinate that we just must somehow make reference to and then produce an answer. It's that I suspect we will become sophisticated enough, our systems will become sophisticated enough to actually generate the legal answer based on all the messiness of the real world that the system is able to avail itself of, and produce a just answer and a very, very good answer to what the law requires in a particular context.
So the legal singularity would also be the legislative singularity, because the AI would be making laws up as it went along.
Yeah, and the way to think about it is that there would be laws about how laws are made, right? So and it's kind of this idea of meta law. You've got a certain system that Parliament has endorsed, for example, that is. So we've got the code that is the law, and it will generate answers, and it'll draw on data sources that are all vetted and approved by Parliament. And maybe Parliament will be behaving differently. There's so many things that will change, I suspect, going forward. But the role of lawmaker will be recognizably the same, and also quite recognizably different than it is at present. And so we will get comfortable with delegating certain rulemaking potentials to a system that does so endogenously and to some extent autonomously, but reviewably on its own. And it's when it's functioning well, it'll appear to be magical in terms of its ability to produce better, fairer, more efficient outcomes. And that's what I mean by the legal singularity.
So you've given it a big thumbs up there. Magical, fair. Other potential drawbacks?
Well, I think so, right? So this is one of the big reasons why my colleague Abdi Adid and I wrote the legal singularity. We are firm believers that, as the subtitle suggests, AI can make law radically better. But one of the key words in that subtitle is can. I don't think it necessarily will. I believe it can, if we collectively are able to ensure a safe liftoff of AI and safe deployments, and are able to basically turn this technology onto itself in a way and use it to guide and maintain consistency and alignment with our desires. Then I think we can turn it in a safe direction and radically improve the fairness and efficiency of the legal system. Of course, there have long been those who have questioned whether that is at all likely, or something that we should believe is inevitable. They have said, no, it could actually be quite dystopian, this future where technology can lead to heightened degrees of social control and observation of individual level behavior. Imagine a totalitarian state armed with these kinds of technologies. It could be quite unattractive, a future equilibrium. This is why Abdi and I wrote the legal singularity. We want to make sure that we're putting our hands up as those who are cautiously, extremely optimistic about this technology and what it can do, and also we want to recruit as many very clever, very curious people as possible to think about these worst case outcomes and help to prevent against those emerging.
I think David and I certainly echo your cautious optimism, and definitely echo your call for more and more people to be thinking about these developments, because they're very, very significant, and we need many more people to be thinking about them than currently are. And Ben, that was a really interesting look at both the short-term and the longer-term possible implications of advanced AI in the legal sector. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to mention a film, going back to your comments about the Hollywood strike. There's a really interesting movie made in 2013, or released in 2013, called The Congress, starring Robin Wright-Penn as an actress who signs a contract to allow a production company to use her image however it wants forever in movies. So it's quite a far-sighted idea that the movie's based on. And so she goes into a room and using motion capture technology, they film her in every possible position, and then they go and make a series of movies. The first half of the film is all about that, and it's really interesting, raises lots of interesting questions. And then the second half of the movie, it becomes a cartoon and goes completely bonkers. And it's as if somebody dropped a couple of tabs of acid and just carried on making the movie. It's utterly nuts and doesn't make any sense to me, at least. Maybe it does to others. But the first half is definitely worth watching for people thinking about that set of ideas. And what we need is for somebody to make a similar movie about the law industry. That would be fun.
I love it. I'm not familiar with the film.
How urgent is this stuff, Ben? Are we talking decades in the future? Are we talking the middle of the century? Or are there circumstances in which lawyers might be going on strike in 2 years' time because they see the writing on the wall, as it were?
Awfully challenging question, David. I think one of the things that we are likely to all agree on is that humans are not particularly good at understanding exponential changes in any kind of process, including in technology. And there's so much happening on the AI front right now. It really seems like it would be a mistake to say that these changes are not going to have profound implications, even in the short term, in the legal profession and for the emergence of a legal singularity. I think when Abdi and I started writing the book 4 years ago, I would have said, maybe by the time I am hanging up my saddle, maybe sometime in the 2070s, it would be plausible that there could be a legal singularity. I think just witnessing what has happened over the course of the past 4 years, I think, and even back in 2019 when we started, I would have said the same thing. We're terrible at predicting exponential changes, and so I always need to caution myself to be more aggressive in making these predictions than my gut tells me. We tend to do linear projection. I think it's really hard to know, but I would be surprised if by 2030 it doesn't become completely obvious to everyone that this is on the doorstep. This is happening, and everyone will be able to point to certain things in which things remain quite the same, but there will be pockets that are really showcasing where all of this is going in the next several years. I think it's very close, and it's producing a sense of urgency for Abdi and I to talk about the book as much as we possibly can, and to get the word out and to start turning lawyers onto these ideas. The beautiful thing about the emergence of ChatGPT and all the attention on AI more broadly is that lawyers now, I think every conversation I have with a lawyer, they now seem convinced that this is happening and that this is an important change in technology that's going to have big implications for the profession. That was not true 4 years ago. That was not true 2 years ago. That wasn't even true 12 months ago, but it is now absolutely true. And so I think this is a very positive development if we can get people turned on to this idea that there are things we need to be thinking about collectively to make sure we get to the right kinds of outcomes here.
Yeah, well, amen to all of that. Ben, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the podcast.
It's my pleasure, Callum. Thank you for having me. Thank you, David.
Thank you.